Hello, bună ziua? Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Means good day in Romanian, I'm told. I tried to learn a little bit about the language and the culture before I come to a place, I apologize for not knowing a little bit more Romanian. Certainly, you guys all know a lot of my language, probably even a lot more than I do in some cases. So today I want to talk to you about kind of getting past what I call the hype hangover. That is that feeling after a kind of a journalistic story, or after a big news event, or after a buzz around the community, where you're left felt feeling a little bit lacking, a little bit wanting from more substance, or at least not the headaches that some of this hype, some of the exposure has caused, and get back to what I hope we all want to do, which is more happy hacking. This is certainly a great venue for hacking. They've got a huge CTF that's very, very popular worldwide. I think they had about 1,000 teams competing from over, was it 30 different countries, something like that. There's also the Hack the Bank, which is a really good contest. You get the opportunity to be one of the top researchers in our field for a day. The late Barnaby Jack, who famously hacked an ATM, and they called that jackpotting. Um, so I'm from Atlanta. We had the Olympics in 1996, and we had an incident there where a bomb went off in a park. I was actually volunteering in the Olympics, and so when I read about this news story, I was particularly kind of affected because I felt, I could have been there. That could have been me. Um, so as I was preparing for the talk, the Paris events reminded me of this event that happened in my life. Interestingly, in this story, there was somebody who found the bomb before it went off, and he was able to alert the police. They came in, and the bomb technician started defusing it. It went off, so a couple of police officers were killed. But they say he saved over 100 people's lives, and so he's really did a great thing, an amazing thing. But it seemed a little bit too coincidental that he came in and found this bomb right before it went off, alerted the police. And so a lot of people started speculating, did he somehow plant the bomb and he was looking for attention? What happened there? A few days later, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a story that said FBI suspects that Hero Guard may have planted a bomb. After the newspaper published this story, of course, media went crazy, the public went crazy. Everybody was looking into his past life, his career, his history. They found some things that they looked at and said, maybe this is evidence that he's not a good security guard, that he was trying to go for fame, that he's trying to use this for publicity. And there was a public outcry to arrest him. Eventually, the FBI did arrest him. They held him for several months, built the case. Ultimately, they ended up letting him go because they couldn't build a strong case. But the hype surrounding this media event ended up basically ruining his career, ruining his life. Um, After the news article hit, the hype cycle kind of took over, and it was out of anyone's control. From that point on, it was kind of at the whim of whoever had the loudest voice to announce the biggest story. And as I was looking at the hype cycle around Vegas earlier this year, and if you were out at DEF CON, Black Hat, besides, it was hard to get away from the story of Dr. Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek hacking a Jeep, right? I'm sure most of us heard about that, especially if you were in Vegas, especially if you were in the United States, but I'm sure it made its way even over here, especially the security community being as small as it is. Um, and I wanted to kind of talk about this and relate it back to this hype cycle, right? So if you don't know, Dr. Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek have spent a couple of years now looking into automotive cybersecurity and looking at some of the areas where potentially a remote attacker could compromise a vehicle and get it to do things that it shouldn't be able to do remotely, like turn off the transmission, shut off the brakes. And they were able to demonstrate this over the summer on an untampered with vehicle, fresh off of the factory floor room, basically, through the wireless network, the 3G, 4G connection that was in the car. They were able to rewrite the firmware in the infotainment system to be able to then send spurious messages across the car network to be able to cause it to do things like turn the wheel at low speeds, to disable the brakes, to be able to cut the transmission off. And they demonstrated this on a highway. So that got a lot of press, obviously. I don't want to dwell too much on what the hype looked like, but pretty quickly it was clear that Chris and Charlie, the researchers who discovered this, were no longer in control of the storyline. That the good work that they did got subsumed by the hype surrounding it, by the confusion that existed in the media, in people's minds. You know, all of my friends who knew I am in the security industry asking me, you know, should I panic? Should I buy an old car? I had a lot of people say after this event, you know, I just drive a mid-90s car. I'm going to start buying older cars now because I'll feel safer. In reality, they're not safer because modern cars are way safer than some of the older ones. So the story kind of got out of control, and it took over what the story should have been, which is the good research and the knowledge that automakers are doing more. They just need to do it faster. Instead, it became about the hype around it, and particularly a lot of critics focused on one aspect, which was the live demonstration on a highway where they remotely cut the brakes. A lot of people called them reckless and putting people's lives in danger. And the story became more about that than the research. So just to really quickly run through kind of an analysis and a recap, there was some really solid technical work here. They were able to get remote control of the vehicle and overwrite its firmware live over the air. That's not easy to do. That took a lot of work. That took a lot of effort, and it was really good work that was done. They also debunked the myth that there's no remote attack surface on vehicles over the air, which is clearly not the case. What they did triggered a software update to fix a several years old bug in some of the software. Then there was a subsequent recall that increased the adoption rate of that software fix. There was a carrier block that reduced exposure across the entire deployed fleet, which is again a good thing. But you started to like I said, see some of the negative blowback from particularly some of the media reports. There were a number of media outlets that called what they did reckless, said that they're endangering lives. There were a number of public policy makers and legal experts who called for them to be arrested or at least investigated for some of this. The large amount of negative publicity for the automakers also got in the way of some of the efforts that they were already taking to reach out to security researchers. There were a couple of public vulnerability disclosure programs that were basically stifled after the media hit and after the hype came out. So it got in the way of protecting people, and it was antithetical to what they were trying to do, which is to get more safety in cars. And it deployed what we call antibodies to some of the security research that was going to be done and that has been done since then among policymakers, legislators, the legal community, some of the media outlets, certainly some of the automotive companies. It's a lot harder to talk to them now because of the negative publicity. And one of the interesting things that I've learned from working with some of the legislators in the US is they're very, very concerned about any crisis of confidence in the buying public that could affect GDP. So if people stop buying cars because they're afraid that they might get hacked, that has a material effect on the global economy. In the US, it's something like 20% of the global economy is in the auto segment. So that really is concerning to policymakers, it's concerning to economists, it's concerning to everybody. Now, I want to contrast that with a different story that you might not have heard about. This is the story of a researcher named Billy Rios, who he's spent years looking into medical devices. One that he was particularly interested in, he did some investigation in around the same time frame, published some information a little bit earlier to the federal government of the U.S. and to the manufacturer, um, and ultimately ended up with a very, very similar result. That is, there was a kind of a recall issued for those devices to be removed from service, so to kind of fix the flaw. But you didn't hear about it a lot, and some of the work that he's done has actually helped to build up the ecosystem to make it better. So again, it was a solid technical demonstration. He was able to reverse engineer the firmware, I believe, and find that there was a connection that wasn't supposed to be there, and he could actually use this insulin pump or the infusion pump to dump all of the medication into a patient at once. The flawed device was totally removed from the marketplace, or at least as strongly worded a letter as could be, but it was done in a safe way. So the way that the FDA issued their recall, they don't call it a recall, but it essentially was, is they told hospitals, you can't buy this device anymore because it's not for sale. And where you have it in your own healthcare environments, transition to safer devices that aren't affected by this. So in a sense, it was pulling this bad product from the market. Also, the work that Billy did, as well as some other security researchers, caused people like the American Food and Drug Administration, who regulate medical devices, some of the medical device makers, some of the other industry groups like HIMSS, and like some of the other players, to reach out to researchers more, to engage in a more positive, productive, collaborative manner than they would have done had it been a big hype cycle and a lot of negative press around this. It also paved the way for future actions such as this to be taken. So on August 3rd, when the FDA issued their safety communication, it was the first case where they have essentially issued a recall without demonstrated proof of patient harm. In other words, nobody had to die to get this recall to happen. That's really powerful because in working with the FDA and some of the other agencies, as well as the medical device makers, as well as a lot of the people in the security community, we had heard time and time again, nothing can be done until patients die. And this is a case where we didn't have to have that. And it was because of the collaboration, not the public attention. And the next time around, when something like this happens and it gets into a hype cycle, the media is going to be a little bit more forgiving because of the example that Billy has set, as well as some of the others who do similar things, to make researchers a little bit more human, a little bit more kinder and gentler, to offset a stereotype that already exists that researchers are just hackers. They want to hack the planet and break into everything, and fighting those stereotypes is one of the good outcomes of this. There are still devices in use, but that's because in a lot of cases you have the option of either using a flawed medical device to save a life or not using a flawed medical device and having a lower chance of saving the life. So this is an example again where clearly the right decision is not to just yank all of these off the market at once. So this gets me to kind of the main point of what is the hype hangover? So I'll describe it really quickly. Everybody, I'm sure, has probably seen the movie Hangover. I've watched it like 5 times on planes. It's great. So, the night starts out. You're like, all right, I'm going to have a drink. This will be fun. Get together with some friends. You start drinking. They're like, oh, yeah, this is great. Look at all the stuff that's going on. We can go over here. We can go over there. I mean, if you're in Vegas, then you can do anything. And then by the end of the night, you're like, yes, I'm the king of the world. I rule. This is great. But then the next morning, it's not so good, right? Wake up. Oh, man, why is there a tiger in this room? I don't understand what went on. Where are my clothes? What do we do? If you're in a situation like these guys were, do we leave the tiger? Do we take it back to Mike Tyson? What are the best of our bad alternatives? And how do we make a choice? We've got to make a choice quickly, so let's just decide on something and then go act on that. And then that becomes whatever you did, right? If you decide to just leave the room and bolt and make a bad choice, then you're kind of stuck with that, right? You can't go back and undo what you've done in the past. And then at the end of that, you're like, oh my God, I'm never going to drink again. This is awful. And then you have the hangover too. So the cycle perpetuates, the cycle repeats. And I see a pattern and a corollary in the hype cycle that happens after some big publicity happens around a hacking event, whether it's a Sony breach, whether it's a car getting remotely controlled. There's an initial discovery phase. The researchers find that this has happened. And that's kind of cool, right? You found a bug, and you get to now figure out what the impacts are. Then as you disclose that bug, you're helping to make things better, to make things safer, to improve things. You're getting a little bit of attention. It's really nice. Hopefully it's all good attention. Sometimes, manufacturers or software makers don't like to hear that their baby is ugly, but you have to persevere through that. Then if it really gets legs, as we say, and the story gets picked up by journalistic outlets, if you go on a PR campaign with your company to publicize, this is the next hack and everybody's going to die, and the fear, uncertainty, and doubt of the story starts to pick up and really accelerate, you really quickly lose control of the narrative. You're not able to shape what gets said about your vulnerability, the outcomes that could happen. It gets taken over by someone else. The media, the panic caused by confusion in the general public. You a lot of times get people who step in who maybe they don't have the best interest of the public at mind. So if it's a vulnerability in automobiles, you might get an antivirus company to step up and say, we need to put more antivirus in automobiles. That'll fix all of the problems. And actually, that's a case where that happened, where they were talking to some public policymakers trying to get them to legislate something like antivirus for your cars. That's certainly not an outcome that I want to see. I don't want to have to go to the dealer and upgrade my antivirus every year. But those reactions, those initial reactions, get kind of set into stone. Once there's a law made, it's really, really hard to unmake it. Once a manufacturer starts going down a certain pathway to remediate either a single flaw or a part of their process, it's really hard to turn back. If they find that it's cheaper to just sue researchers, they're not going to stop suing researchers. So that initial reaction turns into a more consistent pattern of behavior over time that can kind of poison the industry. And eventually, you get a return to a level of trust among the general public that may not be justified. You get people saying, well, yeah, this is theoretically possible, but no one would ever hack our cars, right? Yeah, this is theoretically possible, but it's never happened before. And so we don't necessarily have the evidence to support any of those statements, but people tend to believe them. And that perpetuates this cycle because it instills more vulnerability, more exposure. We keep going down that pathway towards harm, back to the beginning of this cycle. The long-term effects of this can be pretty brutal. We've seen a trend globally in the past decade or so of criminalization of security research and security researchers. In Germany, there are laws on the books prohibiting hacking tools. So if you're a security researcher and you have a tool that can be used for remote intrusion of a system, you could potentially be arrested for that. There's something called the Vasanara Arrangement. Has anybody heard of the Vasanara Arrangement? A handful of people. So it's an international, essentially treaty among, I think it's 30-something nations, that they would voluntarily implement this to essentially curb the use of intrusion software globally. That is, if you use Metasploit in your day-to-day activities and you have any kind of private exploit code, that could potentially bar you from entering a country or exiting a country where that code was created. In the US, certainly there are a lot of laws around criminalizing things that can be accurately described as security research. And a lot of these things are unintentional. They're just the outcome of something scary that happened in the hype cycle. Allegedly, one of the most notorious ones, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, came out of somebody in the early 80s who watched war games and thought this shouldn't be possible. All the news, all the hype around that made legislators do what they do, what we pay them to do, which is to make legislation. Right? This also drains financial resources that could be used in other areas. If you look at the global economy for products and services, it's about $76 billion this year is what we'll spend. That's a pretty massive number, especially when you consider the number of breaches is going up, the number of vulnerabilities in software is going up, the amount of exposure that we have is going way up. And still, with all of that spending, we can't stop that trend of increased number of demonstrated harm from cybersecurity incidents. I like to say the only thing that outpaces the rate of failure that we have, the number of breaches, is the amount we spend to try and prevent that. And that's not a good tenable situation. And as we see fewer and fewer, horror stories on TV about people actually being harmed, when there's fewer outcomes that are worst case scenarios, we just look like jerks for always running around saying everything's on fire, we need to fix these things. And so manufacturers, software makers, and others continually build in less and less trustworthy systems as dependencies to other more concrete systems. So we walked into this room today, none of us were worried about what happens if the chandelier falls, or what happens if one of the walls just accidentally crashes and we've got to like stand it back up on our own. But if you look at software code, I am kind of worried that my phone might die, that it might crash, or that the laptop that I'm using might have a seg fault. And so as we're using more and more of this unreliable code in things like planes, trains, cars, medical devices, we're continually putting our lives in the hands of that untrustworthy code, potentially untrustworthy code. But that's not really why I got into security. And I don't think it's why most of us got into security. It wasn't to get into this hype cycle, to have this hangover, to see these negative long-term consequences. I got into it so that I could do something great. I got into it to be able to call my own shots, to know that the work that I did was going to be effective, was going to lead to positive outcomes. And I want to spend maybe not as much time justifying what I'm doing in security research than actually doing it. If you've ever been in the situation of trying to convince some stakeholder, maybe an executive at your company, to do more security for security's sake, that's hard, right? We don't want to be in that position. I wanted to be challenged continually, and I wanted to get better at what I was doing. I wanted to learn, I wanted to practice, I wanted to work, and I wanted to make a difference. And I think that these are things that I've seen in a lot of the other security professionals that I've worked with and that I've come together with at conferences over the years. We want to make the world a better place. You can look at folks like this guy, Davi Ottenheimer. He's doing a lot for humanitarian issues, trying to use big data and large data sets and his expertise and background in manipulating those data sets to find some really interesting conclusions that could come from information that's been generated but that just hasn't been analyzed very well. You can look at guys like Morgan Mayhem, if you know him on Twitter. He does a lot of work with a group called Citizen Lab that tracks surveillance of repressive regimes around the world. These are the types of things that we wanted to get into security for, right? We wanted to dent the universe. And this hype hangover is really getting in our way. We have to figure out a better way, some way around it. We're hackers, right? We see a firewall, we try a couple of passwords to get into the admin console. If that doesn't work, we don't just walk away. We want to overcome those barriers. We want to shape the world, change the world in the way that we need to see fit. And as I mentioned, we're just increasingly dependent on some of this computer code that is fundamentally untrustworthy. As we put more and more of it into our medical devices, automobiles, connected home, and public infrastructure. So let's run through a really quick exercise here. Number of lines of code per system. Is it going up or down? Up. Yes. Thank you for participating. Number of vulnerabilities in that code scales with the number of lines of code. Are we adding more and more? Well, we have an increasing number of systems that rely on code now. What about exposure of that code? Adding connectivity to things, the Internet of Things, vehicles, medical devices. More or less exposure? More, right? What about the number of adversaries that we have? Do we think the number of adversaries is going up or down? Up. What about the sophistication of the adversaries? Up or down? Up. So all of these things are kind of combining against us, putting us in a situation where these things that we traditionally take for granted that are going to be engineered with sound concepts, you know, the bridge you're driving over to get home isn't going to fall down under you, are increasingly being built on top of software code that is vulnerable because all code has flaws, that is exposed because we're connecting it to the internet to integrate it more and to reduce costs, in an environment where the hazards are not whether it's submerged underwater or the degree of rust that it has, but intelligent and adaptive adversaries. Some of them have motivations that we can't understand and can't appreciate, but that we nevertheless can't deny exist, that they want to harm us, or that they want to cause some type of chaos. And I think nothing for me brought it home more clearly than the Sony hack that happened a little while ago that was around December, I believe. This is when, excuse the expression, but the shit hit the fan, right? Sony got hacked. Everybody was running around screaming, it's North Korea. They're going to take all of our movies or something. It's amazing the degree to which this got publicity. The President of the United States, one of the most powerful people in the world, stopped what he was doing and did press conferences and drafted an executive order about the stuff that we do every day. You know, when the president has to get involved to come down and say, look, guys, straighten this stuff out. I can't be dealing with this stuff as well as the other global things that I got to take care of. Like, that's impactful. That shows you the degree of reach that we now have in this industry and the possibilities if we get it right. That's also when I really realized that, you know, maybe people in public leadership positions aren't going to come and save us. You know, typically when something like this happens, everybody gets together and fixes the problem. But, you know, maybe John Wayne's not going to come in on his white horse at the end of the movie and save us. Maybe the cavalry isn't coming. And if the cavalry isn't coming, then that responsibility falls to us to really take a leadership role, to stand up and lead. One of my friends, Karen Elazari, gave a TED Talk, and she said after the TED Talk, she thought she was going to get yelled at and booed off the stage by all the amazing people who were there, people like Bill Gates, people like Randall Munroe from XKCD, because she was saying that hackers are good. They can be part of the internet's immune system. What she found is that instead of getting booed off the stage by those people, they thanked her and congratulated her. And she said she realized that we have already been given permission to change the world, to make it a better place by the outsiders. We just have to reach into ourselves and give ourselves permission. So how do we do that? With a group of colleagues and myself, we've been working on the I Am the Cavalry initiative for quite a while now. And essentially it's an attempt to improve the state of the world, right? The problem statement is that our dependence on connected technology is growing faster than our ability to secure that technology. So where the impacts are greater than a blue screen, are greater than a reboot, are greater than Android malware, we also need to overcome it. We need to be better. We can't continually have increasing number of cybersecurity failures, increasing amount of spending on those failures, and continuing to perpetuate that problem, continuing to exacerbate the hype hangover. We have to be better. And what we've learned is that one of the first things it takes is empathy. Understanding the other people that you're trying to influence. Understanding what makes them work. Instead of the typical reaction that we tend to give people historically when somebody from the outside, like a journalist, might come and talk to us, we tend to say, get off my turf. This is my area, right? Beware of my dog. Instead, when people come to us and they want to ask us questions, understand that they're doing it in good faith, that they really want to know the answers. They're not trying to set us up for anything. And if they're coming to us, maybe they'll listen. Maybe they'll take our advice. Maybe they'll do something with it if it's in the right, given with the right attitude and in the right language. So instead of beware of dog sign, let's put out a welcome mat for them. Let's welcome outsiders. Let's welcome the people who are in government, who are in the media, who are in manufacturing, who are in software makers. Let's allow them to come in and give them our time patiently and with empathy. Outreach is another way. So my first year in infosec, I thought I was like really cool, and I was sitting literally in a basement room. There was a window like up here, and I was just typing away on my keyboard. I had like 8 decommissioned computers over here that I was trying to build snort boxes on. Thought I was really cool because it was a lot of fun. And then there was an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal that said, these are the top 10 things that your IT and security department don't want you to know. It was all about how to get around URL filters and how to evade firewalls and like all of this stuff that to me was just shocking. Like, why is the Wall Street Journal trying to convince the people in my organization to circumvent my security controls? Don't they know? But I took a step back. I said, all right, this is somebody who's trying to put out an article, maybe doesn't understand the implications. And so I took that empathy approach and I reached out to her. And I said, hey, just so you know, those controls are usually there for a good reason. I listed off 3 specific examples. Told her 3 things that could be done instead to accomplish the goal in the way that the employees want to do it, but also that would be safe, that wouldn't open the organization to more risk. And she reached back out to me and said, hey, this is great. Would you like to write a couple of quotes for a follow-up article that I'm doing? So that was the first time I got published in the Wall Street Journal. Was like 3 months after I started my security career. And it wasn't because of some cool technical hack. It was just because I took the time to engage with the journalist, to reach out to them, to say, hey, I appreciate the work you put in. I'm not going to say I liked the article, but I appreciate the work you put into this. Here are some things that you can do to improve in the future. And I think that it was taken with the intent that it was given with, which was an attempt to help. Last year, 2014, I and the Cavalry published an open letter to the automakers. And we took a very similar tact, right? We wanted to get some outreach to them because we don't have, the cell phone numbers of the CEOs, because we don't even, in many cases, have their email addresses. We published an open letter. And we invited them to work collaboratively with other stakeholders where domains of expertise overlap. We reached out and we said, look, we want to recognize your long track record of safety. The statistics are something like 640,000 lives have been saved over the last 50 years through advances in automotive safety technology. That's a huge number, right? So we started with that. And we had a bunch of other information in there, just giving them some pointers, giving them some tips. And we heard a lot from them. I think over the course of the next 3 to 4 months, I was probably on 2 to 3 phone calls a day with somebody in the automotive industry because of this open letter, and because we took control of the narrative, didn't overhype things, and sent it out into the world. We got a lot of skepticism and a lot of people asking us, what our game was. Are you trying to extort us for money? Are you trying to get jobs in our company? Like, what's going on? Uh, but they called us, and we were able to engage with them and talk with them on a human level and explain, here's why we're doing things. We all want the same things, right? Safer vehicles with better features, out to market quicker and cheaper. Those are the things that technology can enable. But there are side effects to adopting that technology without fully understanding the risks and the consequences. Carrying that message allowed us to get really well embedded with the automotive industry to the point where now I think I'm helping to organize 3 or 4 automotive security conferences with the automakers and the tier ones and the other people in those ecosystems. If you can't do the traditional outreach or just don't want to, you're afraid, you could consider taking a role with one of those affected industries. Maybe not taking a role in the media if you're not media trained, but certainly we have people who are working with the media. They're a part of the media to get the message out in a technically literate way. You could do like Kyle Osborne did, where he left his job of being a security researcher and hacking on Chromebooks all day, and he went to Tesla to help build their internal security program, their corporate security program, so that he could reach across to the vehicle manufacturing side and start to be an ambassador of security in that field. Or you can be like Mike Murray from GE Medical, who started a security consulting company called Mad Security. He was CEO of that for several years and decided he wanted to do something better. So he quit the job, quit the company that he founded to go work for GE Medical and improve security of medical devices. I'm seeing a trend over the past 2 or 3 years of a lot more people doing that. People who don't just take a job for the money, they take it for the impact that they can have to make things better. Being a student or helping to train someone else. We've done, and I've seen a lot of people going to conferences like B-Sides in Las Vegas, where there's a really heavy emphasis on non-technical skills building. Things like being able to effectively communicate outside the echo chamber, to talk to executives. How do you do a media interview, get some media training? How do you learn how to write in a more clear and concise way? There's a lot of people who are on my Twitter feed who go to classes given by Edward Tufte, presentation of visual information. These are things that security researchers are doing, not to be better at the research itself, but to be better at making the research matter, to getting it outside of the echo chamber, to getting it picked up, to being clear when talking with media to avoid getting a hype cycle that gets out of control. At the same time, we can also educate people. So in working with the US Food and Drug Administration, we put together a one-day workshop with them where they brought a lot of their stakeholders in, internal stakeholders. We brought several security researchers in, and we talked with them. It was kind of a getting to know you period where we told them a little bit about security research, what the process looks like, how that works. And then we quickly realized that we needed to know a lot more about what they did and how they did it. So we've engaged with them a lot more to get some of those resources to the security researchers working in that field so that they know the hurdles, the stumbling blocks, the effective processes, the things that don't work in that domain so that we can understand and empathize better. And this doesn't just have to be something that you do formally with some organization. If you happen to be looking to go speak somewhere, I've found that speaking at conferences that are not infosec conferences, you tend to be a lot more special there, right? So if you go to a medical device conference and you're the only hacker there, everybody's going to want to talk to you. Everybody's going to want to learn from you. and you can really communicate your message a lot more effectively to the people who have the ability and the task, really, to make safer devices. And when you are presenting at security conferences, look at what you're doing. Are you going to research mobile malware, which gets a ton of submissions to security conferences? Or are you going to research something that has a little bit more consequence? You know, if you look at the amount of time you spend finding mobile malware, finding a flaw in an Android device, or finding a flaw in a car or medical device, the amount of time on the technical research is probably around the same, but the amount of time you have to spend trying to justify why it matters, it's a lot less if you start over on the human life side of that scale. Start researching things that have a little bit more consequence to them. Speaking as somebody who's helped to organize some conferences and looked at call for papers submissions, I can tell you if I see another talk about mobile malware, I'm probably just going to stop reading at the top of the page because I don't really care, right? But if I see something that is both meaningful and impactful, as well as that has a compelling personal story for me, I'm much more likely to accept that talk or at least give it more consideration than some of those others. So if all you want to do is go around to security talks, make that kind of your full-time gig, then looking at areas where human life and public safety are the consequences of some of your research is a lot easier to get your talks accepted. So just to kind of recap, so it's all on one screen, these are some of the things that we've worked on with Eye on the Cavalry that we've found to be really effective over the past couple of years. I've personally found them effective in my own career and in my own life. We found that as we team with others, whether they're other security researchers, whether they're other people in our industry who aren't doing research but who are also contributing, or whether they're people outside of our industry in some of the affected stakeholder ecosystems, places like media, places like public policy, it's really effective. So that's all I have for today. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take some questions quickly. I think we have about 10 more minutes.
Hello.
Hi.
Great. So over the last 2 years, we saw some vulnerabilities with names like shell shock, Heartbleed. Do you think these names and the publicity is contributing to the hype or not?
It's definitely contributing to the hype. Whether or not it's contributing to the solution, I don't know. If you look at, for example, Heartbleed, that's probably the most famous example. Everybody knows about that now. I mean, I think my mom even mentioned, what is this Heartbleed thing, right? When my mom knows something and what I do, that's saying something. But yet if you look out there at the affected ecosystem, there are people who have done scans, and it's around half of the devices that are found on the internet are still vulnerable to Heartbleed from, you know, between day one and now. And it's a huge number. It's like 200,000, I think, that are still vulnerable to Heartbleed. So, you know, maybe that's a systemic flaw. A lot of those devices might be embedded systems where you can't do a software update. It might be a situation where the administrators of those systems don't know that they're vulnerable to that flaw, or don't know that that software package even exists in their systems. Or it might be something else. I think that certainly with something like that, there's maybe no good way to get that individual point flaw fixed globally across everyone. Now, looking beyond that, if you look at the conditions that produced something like Heartbleed, you can look at the ability of a single coder to enter a line of code in a project that is a dependency for thousands of other projects. and ask, how can we fix that problem so that we don't have another heartbleed? And I think those are the questions that we want to start looking at too. It's not just how do we get more publicity so that maybe we can get one flaw fixed. It's how do we start working with other people to bring people together so that these types of things don't recur. If you look at the amount of code already deployed, it's a finite amount. If you look at the amount to be deployed in the future, it's a huge amount. It's probably infinite depending on how long our species exists, right? How long we continue to use software. So there's a lot more potential for positive change looking forward than there is looking backward. And find this especially with some of the manufacturers, medical device manufacturers, hardware makers, automakers especially. They're putting more and more connectivity and more software in their cars. Those things will be on the road 15, 20 years. They might be in a hospital 30 years. We need to make sure that they're doing things right very, very quickly.
So your recommendation is no names or not?
Well, I'll let that to the individual people to make up their minds. I don't know that it helps, except to feed the hype cycle and to sell stuff. So, if your job is marketing, by all means, name it. But if you want to actually make an impact and do something positive and productive, then maybe spend less time on coming up with names and spend more time on collaborating with people.
Okay, thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
As one of the mobile hackers that you just shat all over, one thing I might want to ask about is things like, you say the car, the entertainment system is how Charlie got in through the towers, but I mean, they also, through such things as like NFC and Bluetooth, the phones actually hook up to them, so a malicious phone might be a good attack vector there. Likewise with the medical devices, actually at a conference I was at a couple months ago, someone talked about actually being diagnosed by a doctor through his iPhone, which is kind of frightening to think about, but having malware on the phone in that case could even cause you to get misdiagnosed. There's apps for your insulin pump at this point, so I think maybe we shouldn't just credit things around mobile, since we have mobile apps for everything now that could potentially affect human life in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I didn't mean to say no one should ever research mobile or you shouldn't look at malware on mobile devices. But when you look at the spectrum of things, if it's a mobile device and the only risk is that maybe a payment card goes missing, the number goes missing, that's a really low consequence thing. What you're talking about, the intersection of mobile health and those mobile devices, or health and those mobile devices, is a really important area. So rather than, what's the implications for PCI of this mobile card scanner, like look at those areas where those devices do interface with healthcare systems.
Quick question.
Yes.
So you touched on a very, very sensitive topic earlier, and that is criminalizing security research. And I think it's something that affects most of the people in this room. Now, what are the next steps? I mean, how do you see the future of this area? Because we're seeing laws, more and more laws being like handicapping cryptography for law-abiding citizens. And I don't think that affects people that don't give a shit about the law,
Right.
So it's only affecting us, most of us. So what can we do about this in order to keep doing what we're doing? And how do you see the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's one that's really hard to answer. There's many potential ways that the future could shape up. I think that first and foremost, being a technically literate voice of reason, knowing the technology, the background, and being able to communicate that out without a lot of the hype and hysteria is a really good positive thing. A lot of the stories that I see from the security research community are really hyperbolic. They're focused on extreme cases, things that it's hard to make a logical jump from, I'll use my mom as an example again, from what my mom sees as the benefit to encryption, which for her, unless it's protecting her payment card, she doesn't really care, to what we see as the benefit of encryption, which is more of a social justice issue, more of a social contract issue, privacy rights. Like, these things are important to us. She can't make that leap. So maybe walk a little bit her way and help her to be able to see the clear pathway to why our perspective is what it is, rather than just running around and screaming that the sky is falling.
Well, it's going to affect your mom as well because, I mean, she's going to use standard encryption, which the bad guys will be able to break, while we won't be able to research better ways to encrypt stuff.
Right.
So,
Yeah, it will affect her. She doesn't realize it, and maybe she doesn't care. You know, she might have a threat profile that is different than the one that we think she has. Sitting down and talking with her, understanding it, asking her what she cares about, what she's concerned with. You know, I might not be able to turn her to see the things that I do, but if I talk with 10 or 15 or 20 people, I'll be able to understand what their concerns really are. I'll be able to work with them to develop a better story so that I can walk all the way back to where they are and then bring them to where I am in a rational and literate way.
okay, then back to the topic of legislator. What's going to happen with the laws, and how is this going to move forward in terms of, you know, gimping the security community?
Well, I think one of the best things that we can do, you know, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I think it's still in flux, right? It could go either way. In the US, you have essentially two automotive agencies, the Department of Transportation and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. One published a letter saying that security researchers, that cars should not be open to security research. The other one just gave a talk the other day in which they said that security researchers are a great benefit to the ecosystem, right? So who knows what's actually going to happen. I think one of the things that we can do, though, to defend ourselves is to demonstrate our value. That's one of the big things that we've kind of come away with over the last couple of years is what demonstrates value more than anything is showing that there's a public good to come from security research. Things like the Volkswagen smog emissions story. If you've not heard about that, that's Volkswagen was found to be covering up the fact that their gas mileage and smog emissions were basically falsified. That was discovered through some clever research by not reverse engineering firmware, which would have been very easy to find malfeasance because that was illegal. Instead, the researchers had to basically drive across the country and plot out the amount of smog emissions and the gas mileage on that trip. So it took a lot longer, it was a lot more costly and a lot harder to do. Instead, if you could pull apart the firmware, then you could see, yes, there's a defeat device in here that's causing that type of thing. So being able to demonstrate public good like that helps to justify why we should be able to research the things that we do. And if you look at, in the US anyways, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act has a provision in it where every 3 years people can submit exceptions and exemptions from that act. One of the big themes this year was security research. Being able to demonstrate that you should be able to reverse engineer firmware for medical devices, for cars, for devices of consequence, to be able to find safety flaws in them, to protect human life. And the Librarian of Congress said, yes, we absolutely agree with that argument. The other arguments that are being made against security research, we don't buy it. So again, reaching out, being a little bit more involved, having a good story to tell, and connecting the dots for people is the way that we protect ourselves from that.
We have time for one more question. No? Okay, then thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.